Good evening, friends. What is it to be a creator? What is creation? What does it mean to create in the image of the Creator God? The way the Bible answers that question is not with a lecture, it's with a song, a story, a liturgy, and a poem, all in one. And here's the song, story, liturgy, poem, with which the Bible describes what it is to create. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, while a very difficult to translate Hebrew word, ruach, spirit, breath, wind, all three, take your pick, from God hovered over the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. The light God called day, the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. All that God does on the first day is light. It seems like a pretty light day, actually. Like, not much of a day. Like, that's it? That's all you did? But we live in the digital world. The digital world is built on information, and information is built ultimately on bits. The smallest unit of information, what we represent in binary code with a 1 or a 0, that's the smallest you can get. And the way that's represented in the analog world, the way it's translated into the world that we live in, is through what you'd call as an engineer signal or no signal. The smallest possible unit of communication is a single presence of signal or absence of signal. A 1 or a 0, light or dark. The very first day of creation, all God does is create signal and no signal. The first step in creating is structuring. It's ordering. It's separating. And in fact, the first 3 days of this song, story, liturgy, poem are all just the simplest possible separations. Day 1, light and dark, signal, no signal. Day 2, the waters above the heavens are separated from waters below. So now there's a heavenly realm where human beings won't go for a long time, and an earthly or terrestrial realm. And then on the third day, God just separates the sea from the land. 3 days, and all God does is create structure. Scott is doing this painting over to my left, your right. And he begins just by arranging his materials. He starts just with a rectangle of canvas, an empty space, but he has to set it up. He has to light it. He has to gather his paints. The first step in creation actually is just creating order, preparing the way. But then, days 4, 5, and 6, this is the cool thing about Genesis 1, is days 4, 5, and 6 correspond to days 1, 2, and 3. So on day 4, corresponding to day 1, the realm of light and dark, the simplest possible division, begins to be filled by God, first with sun and then moon, but then with all the canopy of stars. And now there's not just sun for the day and moon for the night, but let's just create, how many stars are there? If you looked up in Philadelphia, where I'm from, on a typical night, you'd say there's at least 6 up there. If you were out in the ancient Near East, no electric lights nearby, you'd say there must be thousands. How about billions of galaxies? each of which contains billions of stars. That simplest realm of light and dark is now full of pulsating, energy-generating, nuclear fusion furnaces of every possible stage, age, color, temperature. And that's day 4. Day 5 corresponds to day 2. The heavens begin to teem with creatures. Birds start to fly across the sky. Fish start to teem and swarm in the sea. Not just a few birds, not just a few fish, not just 1 or 2 kinds, but countless kinds. Creeping and crawling. Oh, no, that's day 6. Swimming and flying and tweeting. And then day 6, on the dry land, animals appear and begin creeping and crawling. More species of insects than maybe any other category of creature, just because God loves abundance as well as order. And this is actually the second part of creating. If you want a flourishing creation, you need 2 things. You need order and you need abundance together. Let me picture this for you in an orderly way. Some of you are there engineers in the room? Any engineers? Anyone who likes order in the room? I've got an orderly way for you to think about this. Put order on the vertical graph, put abundance, this kind of teeming, this profusion of possibility on the horizontal, on the x-axis. And you can describe the 4 possibilities, right? If you have neither order nor abundance, you've got nothing. The earth was without form, that is, it had no order, and it was void. It had nothing filling it. Neither order nor abundance is the nihil, creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, with which God begins. If you have abundance without order, you have my teenage daughter's bedroom, which has an extraordinary abundance of clothing strewn all around the room, but very little apparent semblance of order. What about if you have order without abundance? I guess you'd call that a machine. A system that's totally predictable. Think about a clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock, always doing the same thing. Never doing anything unexpected, never doing anything unpredictable. And this is what the Enlightenment thought the world was. 150 years ago, if you asked the smartest people studying this cosmos, what is it? They'd say it's like a clock. And God's the great clockmaker. But the problem with that image is that it's all about order. It's all about predictability and regularity. And yes, our universe does have natural laws, predictableness, regularness, but not the kind that can be described as a machine, because a machine has no freedom. And about 100 years ago, physicists pushing to the edges of our knowledge and going down as deep as they could into the structure of the universe discovered that at the bottom, at root, at the smallest scales, at the most fundamental level of particles, it is not a machine at all, because we discovered this thing called quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics behaves according to beautiful mathematical rules, but you cannot describe it like a machine. It's full of possibility and probability, and it cannot be limited to one set of outcomes. The world at its heart has both order and abundance, which is why we can call it a cosmos, a world of possibility, a world of freedom. To be a creator is to create the kind of order where abundance can emerge. And in this song, story, poem, liturgy, which has its pattern, every day God speaks, God sees, God evaluates, God rests, and it's another day. On day 6, the pattern breaks. It's not a machine-like poem. God's already filled the dry land with creatures, and suddenly God speaks in a way God has not yet spoken. God's been speaking, we call this the jussive mood in Hebrew. He's been saying, let there be, let there be. And suddenly God says, let us make human beings in our image, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and all that creeps and crawls along the ground. And God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, God created them. Male and female, God created them. Day 6 goes beyond the order and the abundance to bring something new into creation, God's own image. And at the end of day 6, God says something very interesting. Every day he's ended evaluating his creation. And at the end of day 6, he evaluates it again, but this time it says he saw everything he had made, and behold, this time it was not good, but, what was it? Very good. Why? Why this transition from good to very good? I think because now in God's creation are not just the abundance of stars, the abundance of birds and fish, the abundance of land creatures, but there are now image bearers in the world that are actually going to begin to create in the image of the Creator, which means they themselves are going to add order to the world, which will unlock abundance in the world. In other words, they're going to take nature and they're going to add culture. And as they do that, God's already good world will have its very goodness exposed. So let me give you a couple examples of this, because this is our mission on planet Earth and ultimately in God's whole cosmos. Let's start with eggs. The world has eggs in it. Chickens first, I suppose, although you had to have an egg to have the chickens, so I'm not exactly sure where you start, but eventually there are chickens and eggs. And human beings domesticate the chickens. And the chickens turn out to lay more eggs than are needed just to keep the race of chickens going. So one day a human being approaches a chicken. This is a free-range chicken, known by name, allowed to freely roam, treated in every way with respect by its human owner. And the human being notices the extra egg and says, "May I borrow that egg?" And the chicken, cluck, 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 doesn't mind. So take that egg, take a couple from other chickens, get 3 or 4 eggs. And now you can order those in a new way. First, by breaking them open, and then by stirring them so that you actually start mixing up the white and the yolk, and you get it to an even consistency. And meanwhile, you've prepared a pan that's at the right temperature, and it has just a little bit of grease in the bottom just to sort of prevent the proteins from sticking. And you might add a couple other ingredients in our house, maybe ham and green peppers, and that's right, and you put that in that pan. And just for the right amount of time, then you flip it over one time and you take it off. And you started with an egg. You now have an omelet. Yes, God. Ha! That's right. Because eggs are good, but omelets are very good. The world has grain in it. Human beings harvest the grain. They thresh it so that the chaff blows away and the nutritious germ is left. They mill it to fine, consistent powder. You combine that with just the right amount of salt, and you can add yeast, or you can just wait for the yeast from the air to colonize it, and the right amount of water. Let it sit for a while. It'll start to rise. You've prepared an oven at a particular temperature. You put that in, and you take out bread. Grain is good. Bread is very good. The world has grapes. Human beings grow the grapes. They put them up on trellises so the grapes are stressed. The grapes are exposed to wind and sun and rain. And that means that they generate much more sugars than they would naturally. And there are little yeasties growing on the outside, that's the technical term, of the grape. And so the human beings crush the grapes so those yeast can get at the sugar, and the yeast just go to town. They have a great time. And you'll put that slurry, that mixture, in the right conditions for the right amount of time. And then you draw off the results. And if you're Baptist, you get grape juice. It's magnificent. But I'm Anglican, and when we do this, we get wine. Grapes are good. Wine is very good. Because wine is the fullness of grapes. It concentrates everything that was in that grape. They say that the best wines, you can taste the ground they were grown in. You can taste the minerals of the soil. It concentrates and reveals everything that made that grape what it was. And you don't get grapes without an image bearer. Sorry, you don't get wine without an image bearer. You can get grapes anywhere in the world, and they can split open and ferment, and you get vinegar. But you don't get wine. Human beings have been doing this for centuries. A few years ago, I learned about a man named Sir Gillian Prance. He pioneered a field called ethnobotany. Ethnobotany, Sir Gillian's field, studies how human beings have interacted with the natural world, especially the world of plants. And then he had a more specific field. He was also in ethnomycology, which is just about mushrooms. But one of Sir Julian's great interests was the Amazon rainforest, the most biodiverse environment on the planet. And do you know what Sir Julian Prantz discovered and demonstrated in his lifetime of research? It was that the biodiversity of the Amazon rainforest is a result of human presence and cultivation for time out of mind. Thousands and thousands of years, human beings have lived in the rainforest, not treating it as a machine, but treating it as a place where, with reverence and respect, they discovered its possibility, they unfolded its possibility, and new kinds of creatures could flourish there. So that biodiversity is actually a result of human presence in the world when human beings treat the world as we were meant to do. I'm married to another kind of scientist. I have a picture of her for you. Her name is Catherine. She's a physicist, an experimental physicist, the serious kind of physicist. And Catherine works in a lab with lasers, which highly order light. You take light and you refine it. And she has this whole elaborate apparatus behind her, and whenever I go into her lab, I just stand very quietly in the middle of the room and try not to touch anything or lose an eye or cause an explosion. And what Catherine does with this, because Catherine also does math, is that she's able to take the ordering of the world that comes from math, apply it to the natural world, and among other things, I got one picture of something she's done, maybe not that impressive looking, but this is taken by an electron microscope, and it's what happens when you bombard a little piece of silicon with a femtosecond laser, a highly fast pulse laser. You get these amazing formations, this like forest of upside down cones, which are tiny, tiny, tiny. And it turns out that this is incredibly good at capturing light. Photons sort of tunnel in between those valleys between the cones, and it's like the Hotel California for photons. They can check in, but they never leave. And this makes what's called black silicon incredibly valuable for detection and also for solar power. And it's just been waiting until a physicist would come along and try this. Order the world, you'll discover more abundance in the world. Let me give you one more example. The world has sound in it. Let me sit down at this little keyboard here. Yeah. The world has sound, and it turns out that sound has frequencies, and you can stretch a string. If this were a real piano, it would have strings in it, right? But here we simulate that. And you just strike one string, and it starts to vibrate. Not just with one frequency. This is physics, by the way. It vibrates not just with this lowest note, I'm playing a low C here, but also with the first overtone. Another frequency starts to ring, and it's the C an octave above. So that the world, this is just how the world works, and it's very ordered. You can see this on an oscilloscope, super simple, except that as you go, you start to get other overtones. The second overtone is not another C, but we call it G, the fifth above the octave. And then a couple notes later is what we call an E. And all those overtones are present in that single struck string. So that the reason a major chord, which is C, E, and G together, sounds so nice, I'll play it for you. That C major chord sounds so nice because all the overtones just fit so beautifully together. It's a very lovely chord. It's quite a Christian chord, I think. It's very proper and harmonious, right? So you can take this chord, and let's just add a little more order. Let's structure it through time by playing it out through time like this. So all I'm doing is just extending it through time in a very ordered way, very regular way. Well, it's not me doing it. It's a guy named Johann Sebastian Bach. And let's just repeat that arpeggio 2 times. And now we're playing it in time, but in a very simple, structured way. And Bach thinks, that sounds nice. What if I go to a chord where the overtones don't work quite so well together or have a little bit of tension? And that, strangely, just in the way it strikes our ear, seems to lead to something like this, which seems to lead strangely back to this. And so in these first lines or first bars of Bach's Prelude No. 1, he actually plays the three chords that are the foundations of kind of Western music. We call them 1-4-5-1, C, F, G, C. If there are musicians in the room, I know Bach, it's actually 2 minor 7, 5 second inversion 7, but it's close enough, 1-4-5-1. I just say that so you know that I know that you know that I know what I'm talking about. But if you know these three chords, you can be a worship leader. That's actually not right. You need one more. You need the A minor, the relative minor, and guess what? That's where Bach goes next. But then Bach thinks, I think there might be other chords. And so he starts to explore, still using this extremely simple structure. Just all the chords you can make, using only the 12 tones of the Western scale. And he starts to tell a kind of story of tension and resolution. A little more tension. This is now a jazz chord, a diminished chord. Bach knew all about jazz. A little more tension here, because those overtones are kind of fighting with each other, but then it resolves. And what Bach is basically doing in the simplest piece he ever wrote, as far as I know, so simple that I can play it and talk at the same time, possibly, is he's just asking, how much abundance is there in the world? How much possibility is there, even with the simplest bit of structure? 12 tones, one pattern, and he discovers there's so much. There's great harmony, but there's also great dissonance. Listen to this. That's very dissonant. All those overtones are fighting with each other. Very unchristian, very inappropriate. But in the context of the piece, even the dissonance is beautiful. It was all there, waiting to be discovered, waiting for someone to come along. And Bach can turn it into a story that will touch the very depths of what it is to be human, to live in harmony, to live in dissonance, to seek beauty. And now what Bach is trying to do is bring you back to that home chord, but he's not letting you go back before he's explored every possibility with this one G that keeps ringing in the bass. And now it sounds like we're going home, and we are, except one more moment of tension. And then the 4, and then the 5.